The silence of the plains was broken only by the distant howl of a coyote, as Lillian Everett stared vacantly at the flickering campfire, her eyes reflecting nothing but emptiness and grief. 4 days had passed since she'd uttered a single word, her voice seemingly stolen along with everything else she held dear. The year was 1873, and the harsh Kansas territory offered little comfort to a woman traveling alone with nothing but the clothes on her back and the weight of her sorrow. Logan Reed noticed her the moment he rode into the small settlement of Clearwater Creek. She sat alone outside the general store, her chestnut hair falling in tangled waves around her face, her dress dusty and worn. What struck him most wasn't her obvious beauty beneath the grime of travel, but the hollow look in her eyes, a look he recognized all too well from his own reflection after the war. The townsfolk whispered about the strange woman who'd arrived on the eastbound stagecoach. "Been here near a week," the blacksmith told Logan as he reshoed his stallion. "Not said a word to nobody. Doc Miller checked her over, says there ain't nothing physically wrong with her, just won't speak." Logan nodded, his curiosity piqued despite his determination to keep to himself. He'd been drifting for 3 years since returning from the fighting, working cattle drives and taking odd jobs as he moved westward, running from memories that haunted him like persistent shadows. "Where's she staying?" he asked, surprising himself with his interest. "Widow Jenkins is letting her sleep in the back room of the boarding house. Out of charity, mind you. Woman's got nothing to her name far as anyone can tell." That evening, after securing work at the local ranch, Logan found himself at the only saloon in Clearwater Creek. He nursed a whiskey, watching as the silent woman entered and took a seat at a corner table. She ordered nothing, simply sat with her hands folded, her eyes fixed on some distant point only she could see. The other patrons gave her a wide berth, uncomfortable with her strange silence, but Logan found himself drawn to her. There was something familiar in her isolation, something that called to his own broken soul. When 3 cowboys fresh off a cattle drive entered the saloon, already half drunk and looking for trouble, Logan sensed the shift in the room immediately. They spotted the lone woman, nudging each other and grinning with malicious intent. "Well, what do we have here?" The largest of the 3 drawled, swaggering toward her table. "A pretty little thing all by herself. You looking for some company, darlin'?" The woman didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge his presence. This only seemed to anger the cowboy. "I'm talking to you," he said, his voice hardening as he reached for her arm. Logan moved before he'd consciously made the decision, crossing the room in long strides. "The lady isn't interested," he said quietly, positioning himself between the cowboy and the woman. "This ain't your business, stranger," the cowboy snarled. "I'm making it my business." Logan's voice remained even, but his eyes held the hard glint that had made men back down throughout his years on the frontier. For a tense moment, it seemed the cowboy might push the issue, but something in Logan's stance, the way he balanced lightly on the balls of his feet, the steady hand hovering near his holstered Colt, convinced him otherwise. "Ain't worth the trouble," he muttered to his companions, and they retreated to the bar. Logan turned to the woman who was staring up at him with those empty eyes. "Madam," he said with a slight tip of his hat, "would you mind if I joined you?" She neither accepted nor rejected his request, so Logan took a seat, placing his whiskey on the table. "Name's Logan Reed," he offered, expecting no response and receiving none. For the rest of the evening, Logan sat in companionable silence with the mysterious woman. He didn't press her to speak, didn't ask questions she wouldn't answer. He simply offered his presence, a shield against the curious and occasionally hostile stares of the other patrons. As the saloon began to empty, Logan stood. "It's getting late. May I walk you back to Widow Jenkins' place?" The woman rose wordlessly, accepting his escort without acknowledgement. They walked through the quiet streets, the only sounds their footsteps and the occasional distant laughter from the saloon. At the boarding house door, Logan tipped his hat again. "Good night, madam." He turned to leave when he heard it so soft he almost believed he'd imagined it. "Thank you." The words were barely audible, rusty from disuse, but unmistakable. Logan turned back, surprised, but the woman had already disappeared inside, leaving him standing alone in the moonlight. The next morning, Logan found himself returning to the boarding house. He told himself it was simply to check on the woman who'd spoken to him, nothing more. Widow Jenkins answered his knock, her plump face creased with concern. "She's gone," the older woman said before Logan could speak. "Packed up what little she had and left at first light. Paid me with a small silver brooch, probably the last valuable thing she owned." "Did she say where she was headed?" Logan asked, surprised by his disappointment. "Not a word. Just pressed the brooch into my hand and walked out." "Headed north, I believe." Logan thanked the widow and walked slowly back to the livery where he'd stabled his horse. He had a job waiting at the Carson Ranch, good pay for honest work. There was no reason to concern himself with a strange, silent woman who'd chosen to move on. Yet as he saddled his horse, he found himself asking the stable boy which road led north. The trail wasn't difficult to follow. A woman on foot couldn't cover much ground, and the dusty road held clear tracks. Logan spotted her by mid-morning, a solitary figure walking purposefully along the winding path that led toward the mining town of Silver Creek, some 20 miles north. He slowed his horse as he approached, not wanting to startle her. "Madam," he called when he was still a good distance away. She turned, recognition flashing briefly in her eyes before the emptiness returned. She stopped walking but said nothing as he rode up beside her. "Heading to Silver Creek?" he asked, receiving only a slight nod in response. "That's a long way to walk. I'm headed that direction myself." "Would you accept a ride?" The woman studied him for a long moment, weighing his offer. Finally, she gave another small nod. Logan extended his hand, helping her mount behind him. She settled on his horse, her hands resting lightly at his waist, barely touching him. "My name's Logan," he said again, glancing back at her. "In case you didn't catch it last night." The silence stretched between them, and Logan had nearly given up on a response when he heard her soft voice. "Lillian." Logan smiled to himself as he urged his horse forward. "Pleased to meet you, Lillian." They rode in silence for several miles, the rhythm of the horses' hooves the only sound between them. Logan didn't push for conversation, understanding all too well the need for quiet. The war had left him with his own periods of silence, days when words seemed too heavy to form. Around midday, they stopped by a small creek to rest and water the horse. Logan shared his jerky and hardtack, which Lillian accepted with a nod of thanks. As they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, Logan noticed her staring at a small wildflower growing by the water's edge. "Yellow primrose," he said, following her gaze. "My mother used to grow them in her garden back in Missouri." Lillian looked at him, something softening in her expression. "They were in my wedding bouquet," she said, the words coming out haltingly as if each one required great effort. Logan nodded, offering no sympathy or questions, just acceptance. They sat a while longer, the silence between them now somewhat more comfortable. When they remounted, Lillian's hands gripped his waist more firmly, and Logan found himself acutely aware of her presence behind him, the warmth of her against his back. They reached Silver Creek by late afternoon. The mining town was larger than Clearwater Creek, with a main street lined with businesses catering to the needs and vices of the miners who extracted silver from the surrounding hills. You have somewhere to stay? Logan asked as they dismounted in front of the hotel. Lillian shook her head. Let me secure you a room, he offered. I need to find accommodation myself. She started to shake her head again, but Logan held up a hand. Please. I'd feel better knowing you had a safe place for the night. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. The hotel clerk raised his eyebrows at the dusty pair but asked no questions as Logan paid for 2 rooms. They're serving supper in the dining room at 6, the clerk informed them, handing over the keys. Will you join me? Logan asked Lillian as they climbed the stairs. She paused on the landing, her hand gripping the banister. For a moment, Logan thought she would refuse, but then she nodded once more. They parted at her door, Logan promising to return at 6. In his own room, he washed the dust from his face and body, changed into his cleanest shirt, and even attempted to tame his unruly dark hair. He told himself it was simply respect for dining in public, not because of the quiet woman with the haunted eyes. When Lillian opened her door at his knock, Logan was struck by the transformation. She'd washed the travel dust away, brushed her chestnut hair until it shone, and changed into a simple gray dress that, while well worn, suited her slender frame. Without the layer of dust and exhaustion, her beauty was even more apparent: high cheekbones, full lips, and those expressive green eyes that held so much sorrow. You look lovely, he said simply. Color touched her cheeks briefly, the first sign of life he'd seen in her face. The dining room was half full, mostly with miners and traveling salesmen. They found a quiet table in the corner, and Logan ordered for both of them when it became clear Lillian wasn't ready to speak to strangers. As they ate their beef stew and biscuits, Logan found himself talking more than he had in months, perhaps years. He told her of his childhood in Missouri, his 3 sisters, and his father's small farm. He spoke of his time fighting in the war, though he avoided the worst details. He described his years of drifting afterward, working cattle drives and taking odd jobs. Lillian listened intently, occasionally nodding or offering the ghost of a smile. It wasn't until they were finishing their apple pie that she spoke. My husband died, she said abruptly, her voice still rough from disuse. 6 months ago, cholera. Logan nodded, waiting patiently as she struggled to continue. We had a farm in Nebraska. After James died, I tried to keep it going, but the bank. She swallowed hard. They foreclosed last month. I had nowhere to go. I'm sorry, Logan said simply. I was traveling to my cousin in Colorado. The stagecoach was robbed outside Clearwater Creek. They took everything I had left. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her fork. I don't even know if my cousin will take me in. What's your cousin's name? Where in Colorado? Louise Baker. In a place called Timberline. Logan nodded. I know of it. Mining town about 100 miles west of here. I have no money for passage, Lillian said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Nothing to sell but myself, and I won't do that. No, Logan agreed firmly. You won't need to. He hesitated only briefly before continuing. I'm headed west myself. I'll see you safely to your cousin's door. Lillian looked up, surprise and suspicion warring in her expression. Why would you do that? Logan considered his answer carefully. Because someone once did the same for my sister when she was in trouble, he said finally, and because it's the right thing to do. Lillian studied him for a long moment before nodding. Thank you, she said, those 2 words carrying a weight of gratitude that touched something long dormant in Logan's heart. They left Silver Creek the next morning, Logan having purchased supplies for the journey. He'd also found a gentle mare for Lillian to ride, explaining that his stallion, Thunder, wasn't accustomed to carrying double for long distances. I can't accept this, Lillian protested when he presented the horse to her. It's not a gift, Logan clarified. Just a loan until we reach Timberline. I know someone there who might buy her from me. This compromise seemed acceptable to Lillian, though Logan had no real plans to sell the mare. It was an expense he could ill afford, but something about Lillian's quiet dignity prevented him from offering charity she clearly would not accept. The journey to Timberline would take at least a week, following the winding trails through the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. They made good progress the first day, Lillian proving to be a competent rider despite her obvious exhaustion. They camped that night in a sheltered hollow, Logan building a small fire and preparing a simple meal of beans and salt pork. As they ate, Lillian spoke again, surprising Logan with a question. "Why are you really helping me, Mr. Reed, Logan?" he corrected gently. "And I told you, it's the right thing to do." She shook her head. "Men don't typically go out of their way to help strangers without expecting something in return." Logan sighed, setting aside his tin plate. "You're right to be cautious," he acknowledged. "But I assure you I expect nothing from you. Perhaps—" He paused, searching for words to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. "Perhaps I recognize something in you, a kind of loneliness I understand all too well." Lillian's gaze dropped to the fire. "I was alone even before James died," she admitted softly. "He changed after we lost the baby, became distant. The farm was all that mattered to him in the end." The quiet admission hung in the air between them, a shared confidence that shifted something in their relationship. "I'm sorry," Logan said, the words inadequate but sincere. Lillian nodded, accepting his sympathy without comment. After a moment, she reached into the small bundle that contained her few remaining possessions and withdrew a worn leather-bound book. "Would you read something?" she asked, offering him the volume. I miss the sound of stories." Logan took the book, examining its cover in the firelight. "Poems by Alfred, Lord Tennyson," he read aloud. "I'm not much of a reader, but I'll do my best." He opened to a page marked with a pressed primrose and began to read, his deep voice giving weight to the poet's words about love and loss. Lillian closed her eyes, listening intently, and when Logan finished the poem, he noticed a single tear tracking down her cheek. It became their evening ritual as they traveled westward. Each night after supper, Logan would read from Lillian's book of poetry while she listened, sometimes with eyes closed, sometimes watching him with an intensity that made his heart beat faster. During the days, Lillian began to speak more frequently, sharing small details of her life before tragedy struck: her childhood in Ohio, her courtship with James, their dreams of building a prosperous farm and raising a family. Logan offered his own stories in return, carefully edited to omit the worst of his experiences during and after the war. On the fourth day of their journey, a spring storm caught them in open country. They raced for shelter, finding an abandoned trapper's cabin just as the heavens opened. The small, dilapidated structure leaked in several places, but it offered protection from the worst of the downpour. Logan tended to the horses while Lillian attempted to make the cabin habitable, sweeping away dust and debris with a makeshift broom of bound twigs. By the time Logan returned, soaked to the skin, she had cleared a space near the small fireplace and was attempting to light kindling with damp matches. "Here, let me," he offered, kneeling beside her. From his pocket, he produced a small tin containing dry matches and tinder. Soon, a small fire burned cheerfully, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. "You should change out of those wet clothes," Lillian said practically. "You'll catch your death otherwise." Logan nodded but hesitated, suddenly aware of the intimacy of their situation. The cabin was essentially one room with only a half-collapsed curtain providing any separation. Understanding his discomfort, Lillian turned her back. "I won't look," she promised. Logan changed quickly into dry clothes, hanging his wet garments near the fire to dry. "All decent," he announced when he'd finished. Lillian turned, and their eyes met across the small space. Something electric passed between them, a recognition of their shared solitude and the growing connection that neither had anticipated. The moment was broken by a particularly loud crack of thunder that made Lillian jump. Logan instinctively moved closer, offering comfort without touch. "Storm should pass by morning," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. They sat side by side before the fire, sharing the last of their jerky and hardtack. The close quarters made their usual evening reading impossible. So instead, Logan surprised himself by singing softly old folk songs his mother had taught him, ballads about love and longing that seemed to fit their circumstances. Lillian listened, her face softened by the firelight, occasionally joining in when she knew the words. Her voice was clear and sweet, if somewhat hesitant, and the sound of it stirred something profound in Logan's chest. As the evening wore on and the storm continued to rage outside, their conversation deepened. Perhaps it was the isolation, the sense that they were the only two people in the world, that loosened their tongues. "I haven't sung since before James died," Lillian confessed. "It felt disloyal somehow to find any joy after losing him." Logan nodded. "I understand. After the war, I couldn't bear to hear music for nearly a year. Reminded me too much of what was lost." "How did you find your way back?" she asked, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Logan considered the question. "Time," he said finally, "and accepting that being alive isn't a betrayal of those who died, that finding moments of joy doesn't dishonor their memory." "Is that why you've been drifting? Looking for joy?" "Maybe," Logan admitted. "Or maybe running from the absence of it." He paused. "What will you do in Timberline?" "With your cousin," Lillian sighed. "I don't know. Louise married while her husband owns one of the silver mines. She offered me a home after James died, but I was too proud to accept, thought I could save the farm." Her smile was bitter. "Pride doesn't keep a roof over your head or food on your table." "No," Logan agreed, "but it keeps you standing when everything else would have you fall." Lillian's eyes met his, something like understanding passing between them. "Yes," she said softly, "exactly that." They fell silent, listening to the rain drumming on the cabin roof. The storm had eased somewhat, the thunder now a distant rumble rather than the explosive cracks of earlier. "We should try to get some rest," Logan suggested, aware of how tired Lillian looked. She nodded but made no move to lie down. "Would you?" She began, then stopped, seemingly embarrassed. "What is it?" Logan encouraged. "Would you read just one poem?" "For sleep's sake," Logan smiled, retrieving the book from her bundle. "Any particular one?" Lillian shook her head. "You choose." Logan opened the book randomly, finding a poem about a river flowing to the sea. He read it slowly, his deep voice filling the small cabin. When he finished, he looked up to find Lillian watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. "Thank you," she said simply, then arranged her blanket near the fire and lay down, turning her back to him. Logan watched her for a moment, noting the graceful curve of her neck, the way her hair spilled across the rough blanket like liquid copper in the firelight. Something twisted in his chest, a longing he'd thought long buried with his youth and innocence. He moved to the opposite side of the cabin, stretching out on his own blanket, but sleep eluded him. The storm gradually passed, leaving behind a profound silence broken only by the occasional pop from the dying fire and Lillian's soft, even breathing. Morning arrived with clear skies and birdsong. Logan woke to find Lillian already up, her hair neatly braided, heating water for coffee over the rekindled fire. "Good morning," she greeted him, her voice stronger than he'd yet heard it. "I found some wild onions growing near the cabin. Thought they might improve our breakfast." Logan sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "You're full of surprises, Lillian Everett." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, transforming her face. "As are you, Logan Reed." They ate a simple breakfast of hardtack softened in coffee and flavored with the wild onions. As they prepared to leave, Logan found himself reluctant to return to the trail, to break the strange intimacy that had grown between them during the storm. Lillian seemed to share his reluctance, taking her time saddling her mare and repeatedly checking the cinch. Finally, with their few possessions packed and the cabin returned to its previous state, they mounted their horses and resumed their journey. The mountain trail narrowed as they climbed higher, forests of pine and aspen replacing the open plains. The air grew cooler, scented with resin and wildflowers. By midday, they'd reached a high meadow dotted with columbine and Indian paintbrush. "It's beautiful," Lillian breathed, her eyes wide as she took in the panoramic view of the valleys below. "Worth the climb," Logan agreed, watching her rather than the scenery. They dismounted to rest the horses and share a simple lunch. Sitting side by side on a fallen log, they ate in companionable silence, occasionally pointing out a particularly striking flower or a hawk circling overhead. "I've been thinking," Lillian said suddenly, "about what happens when we reach Timberline." Logan tensed, not wanting to contemplate the end of their journey. "What about it?" "I'm not sure I want to be dependent on my cousin's charity. I'd rather make my own way." "That's admirable," Logan said carefully. "But starting over in a new place isn't easy, especially for a woman alone." Lillian nodded, plucking a stem of grass and twisting it between her fingers. "I know, but I have skills. I can cook, so keep accounts." "Surely there's work for someone willing to do it." "I'm sure there is," Logan agreed. "Mining towns always need good cooks and laundresses, and if your cousin is well connected, she might help you find something suitable." "And what about you?" Lillian asked, turning to face him. "What will you do in Timberline?" Logan shrugged. "What I always do. Find work for a time, then move on when the restlessness takes me." "Is that what you want, to keep drifting forever?" The question caught Logan off guard. No one had asked him about his wants in a very long time. "I don't know," he admitted. "Never thought much beyond the next horizon." "Perhaps it's time you did," Lillian suggested gently. Something in her tone made Logan look at her sharply. Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, he saw a future he hadn't allowed himself to imagine: a home, stability, perhaps even love again. The intensity of his longing for it startled him. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Logan was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his revolver. "Stay here," he instructed Lillian, moving to a position where he could see down the trail. 3 riders appeared around a bend, rough-looking men who pulled up short when they spotted Logan. "Well, well," the leader called. "What have we here?" Logan recognized the voice with a jolt of alarm. Tom Blackwood, a notorious bandit who'd been terrorizing the territory for the past year. Logan had encountered him once before, in a saloon in Laramie, and the meeting had nearly ended in bloodshed. "Just passing through," Logan replied evenly, keeping his hand near his weapon. "Don't want any trouble, Blackwood." The outlaw's eyes narrowed. "You know me, we've met. Laramie, last fall." Recognition dawned on Blackwood's face. "The card sharp who wouldn't cheat for me. Reed, wasn't it?" Logan nodded, acutely aware of Lillian behind him. Blackwood's gaze shifted, focusing on something over Logan's shoulder. "And who's your pretty companion?" Logan cursed inwardly as Lillian stepped up beside him, her chin raised defiantly despite the fear evident in her eyes. "My wife," Logan lied smoothly. "We're headed to Timberline to start fresh." Blackwood's leer made Logan's blood boil. Mighty lucky man, Reed, mighty lucky indeed. The tension stretched between them, Blackwood's companions shifting restlessly in their saddles. Logan knew they were outnumbered and outgunned. Their only advantage was position. The narrow trail would force the outlaws to approach single file. "We don't want trouble," Logan repeated. "We've got little of value, just our horses and basic supplies." Blackwood considered this, his cold eyes calculating. "Thing is, Reed, I reckon your wife there might be worth quite a bit to the right buyer." Logan's hand tightened on his revolver. "That's not happening, Blackwood," the outlaw laughed. "You willing to die over a woman, Reed?" "Doesn't seem your style." "Try me and find out," Logan replied, his voice deadly quiet. Something in his tone must have convinced Blackwood he meant business, because the outlaw's smile faded. "Always did think you had more sand than sense," he muttered. After a tense moment, he jerked his head at his companions. "Let's ride. Better pickings down the trail." As the outlaws turned their horses, Blackwood called back over his shoulder, "Watch your back, Reed. Our trails might cross again someday." Logan didn't relax until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. Only then did he notice Lillian was trembling beside him. "Are you all right?" he asked, resisting the urge to take her in his arms. She nodded, but her face was pale. "Who were they?" "Tom Blackwood and his gang. Wanted for robbery and murder across 3 territories." Logan grimaced. "We got lucky. Blackwood's not known for leaving witnesses. He seemed to know you. We had a disagreement once, before I gave up gambling." Logan sighed. "We should move on. Find somewhere defensible to camp tonight in case they circle back." As they mounted their horses, Lillian asked quietly, "Did you mean what you told them, about being willing to die to protect me?" Logan met her gaze steadily. "Yes." Something shifted in Lillian's expression, fear giving way to something warmer, more complex. "Thank you," she said simply. They rode in silence for several miles, Logan constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of the outlaws. By late afternoon, they'd reached a sheltered canyon with a clear stream, a defensible position with only one approach. As they made camp, Logan noticed Lillian watching him with an intensity that made his skin warm despite the cool mountain air. "What is it?" he finally asked as they sat beside the small fire, eating a supper of beans and the last of their jerky. "You called me your wife," she said. "To those men." Logan felt heat rise in his face. "It seemed safer than the truth. I thought they'd be less likely to." He couldn't finish the sentence. "It was quick thinking," Lillian acknowledged, "and probably saved my life." She paused. It felt strange hearing those words again, being someone's wife even if only in pretense. "I'm sorry if it brought back painful memories," Logan said. Lillian shook her head slowly. "Not painful exactly. Just strange." She looked down at her hands. "I never expected to be anyone's wife again." The implication that she might consider it under different circumstances hung in the air between them. Logan found himself unable to respond, his heart racing with possibilities he'd never allowed himself to consider. They retired early that night, both exhausted from the day's tensions. Logan insisted on taking the first watch, promising to wake Lillian for the second half of the night. As he sat beside the dying fire, rifle across his knees, Logan found his thoughts circling around the woman sleeping nearby. In less than a week, she'd somehow breached the walls he'd built around his heart since the war. Her quiet strength, her resilience in the face of crushing loss, her determination to forge a new path, all of it spoke to something deep within him. The realization that he was falling in love with Lillian Everett struck Logan with the force of a physical blow. It was inconvenient, inappropriate, and almost certainly doomed to disappointment. In a few days, They would reach Timberline, and she would begin her new life with her wealthy relatives. What place would there be in that life for a drifting ex-soldier with nothing to his name but a horse and a troubled past? Logan was so lost in these thoughts that he nearly missed the sound, a faint snap of a twig at the canyon's entrance. He froze, every sense suddenly alert. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to see a figure moving stealthily toward their camp. Logan raised his rifle, then lowered it again as he recognized the slight form. "You should be sleeping," he said softly as Lillian approached. "I couldn't," she admitted, settling beside him. "Too many thoughts." "About Blackwood," she shook her head. "About you." Logan's heart stuttered. "Me," in the moonlight, Lillian's face was serene, her eyes reflecting silver. "I've been trying to understand why you're helping me, why you risked your life today for a woman you barely know." Logan swallowed hard. "I told you, it's the right thing to do." "Is that all?" she pressed. The moment stretched between them, fraught with unspoken possibilities. Logan knew he stood at a crossroads. He could retreat behind his usual reserve, or he could take a risk he hadn't allowed himself in years. "No," he said finally, his voice rough. "That's not all." Lillian moved closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her. "What else then?" "I care for you," Logan admitted, the words feeling inadequate. "More than I should, given how brief our acquaintance has been." "Time isn't always the best measure of connection," Lillian said softly. "Some people know each other for years and remain strangers. Others." Logan prompted when she fell silent. "Others meet and recognize something instantly, a kindred spirit, a matching piece." Logan's breath caught. "Is that what you feel?" Lillian nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "It frightens me," she confessed. "I never expected to feel this way again. Especially not so soon after losing James." "I understand," Logan said, though his heart was racing. "There's no need to." His words were cut off as Lillian leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative, yet it sent a jolt through Logan's entire body. For a moment he remained frozen in shock, then he responded, one hand coming up to cup her face. When they parted, both were breathing heavily. Lillian's eyes were wide, as if she too was surprised by her boldness. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize," Logan interrupted. "Unless you regret it." "I don't," Lillian said firmly. "I only regret that it took facing outlaws for me to realize how I feel." Logan smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Better late than never. They sat together through the night, talking softly, occasionally falling into comfortable silences. Lillian spoke of her fears about the future, her grief over losing her home and husband, her uncertainty about depending on her cousin's charity. Logan shared more of his own past, the horrors he'd witnessed during the war, his struggles to find peace in the years after, his aimless wandering in search of something he couldn't name. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Logan found himself saying words he'd never expected to speak again. "Come with me," he said suddenly. "Not to your cousins, but wherever the trail leads us." Lillian looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean, let's find our own path, together." Logan took her hands in his. "I know it's sudden, and I have little to offer you but my heart and my hands, but I think we could build something good, something real." "Logan," Lillian breathed, her eyes searching his face. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I suppose I am," he said, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. "Not right away, perhaps. We could travel together, get to know each other better. But yes, eventually, I'm asking you to be my wife. For real, not just as protection against outlaws." Lillian's smile bloomed slowly, transforming her face. "You're right, it is sudden," she said, "and perhaps a bit mad." Logan's heart sank. "I understand if you need time to, but," Lillian continued, squeezing his hands, I've had enough of safe choices and sensible paths. They didn't protect me from heartbreak or hardship. She took a deep breath. Yes, Logan Reed, I'll come with you, and when the time is right, I'll marry you. The joy that surged through Logan was unlike anything he'd felt before, pure and powerful and terrifying in its intensity. He pulled Lillian into his arms, kissing her with all the emotion he couldn't put into words. As the sun rose over the canyon walls, they made plans. They would still travel to Timberline, but only to visit Lillian's cousin briefly, explain their decision, and perhaps secure some small loan to give them a start. Then they would head west to the Oregon Territory, where land was still available for homesteading. A farm. Logan asked, remembering her previous life. Lillian considered this. Maybe, or perhaps something else. A small ranch, a store in a growing town. The important thing is that we'll decide together. They broke camp with renewed energy, their shared purpose lending wings to their preparations. As they mounted their horses, Logan reached across to take Lillian's hand. No matter what happens, he promised, you won't face it alone again. Lillian's answering smile was radiant. Neither will you. The trail to Timberline seemed to pass more quickly now that they rode with hope rather than uncertainty. They talked constantly, making plans, sharing dreams, learning each other's preferences and habits. Each night, they read poetry by the campfire, and each morning they woke with greater certainty about their decision. They were a day's ride from Timberline when disaster struck. A sudden rock slide, triggered by their passing, sent Lillian's mare scrambling for footing on the narrow mountain trail. Logan watched in horror as the horse lost its balance, tumbling down the steep slope with Lillian still in the saddle. "Lillian," he shouted, dismounting and scrambling down after them. He found her 30 feet down, thrown clear of the horse as it fell. She lay motionless among the rocks, blood matting her hair. "No, no, no," Logan muttered, dropping to his knees beside her. With trembling fingers he felt for a pulse, sagging with relief when he found it faint but steady. The mare had not been so fortunate. The animal lay dead further down the slope, neck broken in the fall. Logan carefully assessed Lillian's injuries. Her left arm was clearly broken, bent at an unnatural angle. A gash on her temple bled freely, and when he gently probed her ribs, she moaned in pain though she remained unconscious. With infinite care, Logan fashioned a makeshift splint for her arm using branches and strips torn from his spare shirt. He cleaned the head wound as best he could with water from his canteen, then bound it with a relatively clean handkerchief. The immediate question was whether to try moving her. The nearest help was in Timberline, still a good day's ride away. Leaving her alone while he went for assistance seemed unthinkable, but moving her risked worsening her injuries. As Logan debated his options, Lillian stirred, her eyelids fluttering. "Don't move," he said immediately, leaning over her. "You've had a fall." Lillian's eyes opened, confusion evident in their green depths. "Logan, what happened? Rockslide spooked your mare. You both went over the edge." He stroked her cheek gently. "How much pain are you in?" "Everything hurts," she admitted, wincing as she tried to shift. "My arm especially. It's broken, and you may have cracked some ribs. Your head took a nasty knock too." Lillian closed her eyes briefly. "The mare didn't make it," Logan said gently. "I'm sorry." A tear slipped down Lillian's cheek. Poor creature, she was a good horse. "Try not to worry about that now," Logan soothed. "We need to figure out how to get you to Timberline." "Can't I just ride with you?" Lillian asked, attempting to sit up and gasping at the pain. "Easy," Logan cautioned, supporting her shoulders. "I'm not sure that's wise. The trail's rough and the jostling could make your injuries worse." "We can't stay here," Lillian pointed out. "No shelter, limited supplies." Logan knew she was right. They had little choice but to press on. "All right," he conceded, "but we'll take it very slow and you tell me immediately if the pain gets worse." With extreme care, Logan helped Lillian to her feet. She swayed, leaning heavily against him, her face pale with pain. Getting her up the steep slope to where Thunder waited was an agonizing process, with frequent stops for Lillian to rest and catch her breath. By the time they reached the trail, the sun was already past its zenith. Logan helped Lillian mount, then swung up behind her, cradling her against his chest to support her injured arm. "Comfortable?" he asked, knowing it was a ridiculous question. "As I can be," Lillian replied, her voice tight with pain. They proceeded at a walk, Logan constantly aware of Lillian's ragged breathing and occasional whimpers when the horse's movement jarred her injuries. By sunset, they'd covered less than half the distance to timberline, and Lillian was nearly unconscious with pain and exhaustion. Logan found a sheltered spot to make camp, easing Lillian down onto his bedroll. He built a fire quickly, then used the last of their coffee to make a strong brew, hoping it might help revive her. "Drink this," he urged, supporting her head as she sipped the bitter liquid. Lillian managed a few swallows before turning her face away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm slowing us down." "Don't apologize," Logan said firmly. "None of this is your fault." As night fell, Lillian's condition worsened. She developed a fever, her skin burning to the touch while she shivered uncontrollably. Logan covered her with both their blankets and kept the fire blazing, but still she trembled. In her delirium, she called for people Logan didn't know, her mother, her husband, someone named Sarah who might have been a sister or friend. Logan held her hand through it all, speaking softly, reassuring her of his presence. Toward dawn, her fever broke, leaving her weak but lucid. "Logan," she murmured, her eyes finding his in the pre-dawn light. "I'm here," he assured her, squeezing her good hand. "How do you feel?" "Like I fell down a mountain," she attempted to joke, though her smile was more of a grimace. "But the pain is a bit less." Logan touched her forehead, relieved to find it cooler. "Your fever's broken. That's good." "How far to timberline?" "Half a day's ride, normally. Longer at the pace we'll need to take." Lillian nodded, determination hardening her features. "Then we should get moving." "The sooner I see a doctor, the better." Logan admired her courage even as he worried about her strength. "Are you sure you're up to it?" "I don't have much choice, do I?" Lillian pointed out pragmatically. "Unless you want to leave me here and go for help." "That's not happening," Logan said firmly. They ate a cold breakfast neither had the patience for cooking and mounted up once more. Lillian insisted she felt stronger, but Logan could feel the tension in her body as she fought against the pain. The journey to timberline was the longest of Logan's life. Every jolt that made Lillian gasp felt like a personal failure. By the time the mining town came into view in the late afternoon, both were exhausted, Lillian barely conscious in his arms. Timberline was larger than Logan had expected, a substantial settlement that had grown prosperous from the silver mines in the surrounding mountains. Substantial wooden buildings lined the main street, including a hotel, several saloons, a bank, and to Logan's immense relief, a doctor's office. He rode directly to the latter, dismounting carefully while still supporting Lillian. The doctor, a middle-aged man named Harrison, took one look at Lillian's pale face and broken arm and ushered them inside. "What happened?" he asked as he helped Logan lay Lillian on an examination table. "Rockslide spooked her horse. They went over the edge of the trail about a day's ride east of here," Logan explained. "She's got a broken arm, possibly some cracked ribs, and took a hard blow to the head." Dr. Harrison nodded, already gently probing Lillian's injuries. "You did a good job with this splint," he commented. "Are you her husband?" "No," Logan started to say, but Lillian's weak voice interrupted. Yes, she said, her eyes finding Logan's. He is, the doctor nodded, accepting this without question. Well, Mr. Reed, Logan supplied, his heart racing at Lillian's claim. Logan Reed. Mr. Reed, I'll need to reset this arm properly and stitch that head wound. It will be painful for your wife. Perhaps you'd like to wait outside. I'm staying, Logan said firmly, moving to take Lillian's good hand. What followed was an ordeal that tested both their endurance. Lillian bore the pain of having her arm reset with remarkable fortitude, only a single cry escaping her lips when the bones grated together. The stitching of her head wound seemed almost minor in comparison. When it was done, Dr. Harrison administered laudanum for the pain, and Lillian quickly drifted into a drug-induced sleep. She's a strong woman, the doctor commented as he washed his hands. Those injuries would have some men half dead with shock. She is that, Logan agreed, gently brushing a strand of hair from Lillian's forehead. She'll need complete rest for at least a week, Dr. Harrison continued. The arm will take 6 weeks or more to heal properly. The ribs, perhaps a month. Do you have accommodations in town? Logan hesitated. We were planning to stay with her cousin, Louise Baker. Do you know where I might find her? The doctor's eyebrows rose. Louise Baker is your wife's cousin. Well, that simplifies matters. The Baker Mansion is at the north end of town, you can't miss it. Largest house in Timberline. Logan nodded, though his heart sank at the description. What would these wealthy relatives think of Lillian's choice in a husband? I'll arrange for a wagon to transport her there, Dr. Harrison offered. She shouldn't be moved on horseback again until those ribs begin to heal. While they waited for the wagon, Logan stepped outside to tend to Thunder, who had waited patiently through the entire ordeal. As he was unsaddling the horse, a well-dressed man approached, eyeing Logan with obvious suspicion. I understand you've brought Lillian Everett to town, the man said without preamble. Logan straightened, his hand instinctively moving closer to his revolver. And who might you be? Edward Baker, Louise's husband. Logan relaxed slightly. Mr. Baker. Yes, Lillian is inside with Dr. Harrison. She was injured on the trail. Baker's expression remained stern. And your relationship to Mrs. Everett is? Before Logan could respond, the doctor emerged from his office. Ah, Mr. Baker. Good timing. I was just about to send someone to fetch you. Your wife's cousin has suffered a bad fall, broken arm, cracked ribs, head injury. She'll need care for several weeks. Of course, Baker said smoothly. We'll take her in immediately. Louise has been worried sick since we received word of James's passing. Excellent. This is Mr. Reed, her husband, the doctor continued, gesturing to Logan. Baker's eyebrows shot up. Husband. But James Everett only died 6 months ago. Logan opened his mouth to explain, but Dr. Harrison cut in again. The wagon's ready. Let's get her settled first, shall we? Questions can wait until Mrs. Reed is comfortable. The journey to the Baker Mansion was mercifully short. Lillian remained unconscious throughout, the laudanum ensuring she felt no pain from the movement. Logan rode Thunder alongside the wagon, acutely aware of Edward Baker's suspicious glances. The Baker home was indeed impressive, a 3-story structure of stone and timber that spoke of substantial wealth. Servants emerged at their arrival, efficiently transferring Lillian to a guest bedroom that was larger than any room Logan had ever slept in. Louise Baker proved to be a kind-hearted woman who asked no questions, focusing entirely on making her cousin comfortable. She was a smaller, darker version of Lillian, with the same green eyes but black hair instead of chestnut. Thank you for bringing her to us, Louise said to Logan as they stood watching a maid settle Lillian in the large 4-poster bed. Edward said there was some confusion about your relationship. Logan sighed, knowing the moment for truth had arrived. There's no confusion, madam. Lillian and I aren't married, not yet, at least. We met on the trail about a week ago. She was, in a bad way, hadn't spoken in days. I helped her and we formed an attachment. Louise's expression softened. I see, and the doctor. Lillian told him we were married. I'm not sure why. I think I might be, Louise said with a small smile. My cousin has always known her own mind, even as a child. If she claimed you as her husband, she must have her reasons. She agreed to marry me, Logan admitted, before the accident. We were planning to visit you briefly, then head west to the Oregon Territory. Start fresh together. Louise studied him thoughtfully. You must be quite remarkable, Mr. Reed, to have won Lillian's heart so quickly after her loss. I'm nothing special, madam. Just a man who recognized a kindred spirit. This answer seemed to satisfy Louise. Well, you're both welcome to stay as long as needed. Edward may be a bit difficult at first. He's protective of family, and sudden marriages to strangers naturally raise his suspicions. But he'll come around when he sees how you care for Lillian. Logan doubted it would be that simple, but thanked Louise for her understanding. The next several days established a pattern. Logan spent his days at Lillian's bedside, reading to her from her book of poetry when she was awake, simply holding her hand when pain or medication pulled her into sleep. The baker's servants treated him with polite deference, though he noticed they always knocked before entering, as if uncertain of his status in the household. Edward Baker made his suspicions clear at every opportunity, questioning Logan about his background, his intentions, his financial prospects. Logan answered honestly, refusing to invent a more impressive history to please Lillian's wealthy relative. Lillian herself grew stronger each day, though the pain from her injuries continued to exhaust her. When they were alone, she and Logan spoke of their plans, adjusting their timeline to account for her needed recovery. I still want to go west with you, she assured him one afternoon, a week after their arrival. As soon as I'm well enough to travel. Logan kissed her hand gently. There's no rush. Your cousin is happy to have you here, and this is the best place for you to heal properly. But you're uncomfortable, Lillian observed. I see how Edward watches you, how the servants treat you like some kind of interloper. I've endured worse, Logan said with a smile. And it's worth it to be near you. Lillian's eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve you, Logan Reed. Nonsense, he replied, brushing away a tear that had escaped. If anything, it's the other way around. Their moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Louise entered, carrying a tea tray. How are we feeling today? She asked cheerfully. Better, Lillian replied. Dr. Harrison says I might be able to start moving around the house tomorrow. Wonderful news. Louise set down the tray and poured 3 cups of tea. I've been meaning to talk to you both. About your plans. Logan tensed, suspecting he knew what was coming, an attempt to persuade Lillian to stay in Timberline, to abandon their dreams of heading west together. Edward and I have discussed it, Louise continued, handing them each a cup, and we'd like to offer you a wedding, a proper one here in Timberline once Lillian is fully recovered. This was so far from what Logan had expected that he nearly dropped his teacup. A wedding, Louise smiled. Yes. Since you're planning to marry anyway, why not do it here, where Lillian has family to support her? We'd cover all expenses, of course. And, she hesitated, glancing at her cousin, we'd like to offer you both a wedding gift, a stake to help you establish yourselves in Oregon. Nothing extravagant, but enough to purchase land and supplies without hardship. Logan was speechless. Lillian reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. That's incredibly generous, Louise, she said, her voice thick with emotion. But why? Louise's expression grew serious. Because I should have done more when James died. I offered you a home, yes, but I knew how proud you were. I should have come to you, helped you save the farm." She sighed. "This is my chance to make that right, to help you build the future you deserve." "I don't know what to say," Logan admitted. "Say yes," Louise urged. "Let us do this for you both." Lillian looked at Logan, a question in her eyes. He nodded slightly, and her face broke into a radiant smile. "Yes," she told her cousin, "we accept with deepest gratitude." Louise beamed, rising to embrace Lillian carefully, mindful of her injuries. "Wonderful. I'll start planning immediately. Nothing too elaborate, I know that's not your style, but something beautiful and meaningful." After Louise left, Lillian turned to Logan. "Are you truly all right with this?" "A formal wedding wasn't what we planned." Logan took her hand, pressing it to his lips. "I'd marry you in a barn or a palace, Lillian Everett. The details don't matter to me, only that you'll be my wife at the end of it." Lillian's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "I love you, Logan Reed. I never thought I'd say those words to anyone again, but I love you with my whole heart." "And I love you," Logan replied, the words feeling both momentous and entirely natural. "More than I can say." The weeks of Lillian's recovery passed more quickly than either expected. True to her word, Louise planned a simple but elegant wedding ceremony to be held in the Baker's garden once Lillian was fully healed. Edward Baker gradually warmed to Logan, especially after discovering they shared an interest in horseflesh and breeding. By the time Lillian's arm was freed from its splint, Logan had become an accepted, if not entirely conventional, member of the household. Dr. Harrison pronounced Lillian fully recovered 8 weeks after the accident. "The arm has healed nicely," he declared after a final examination. "The ribs as well. You're fit to travel whenever you wish, Mrs. Reed, or should I say Miss Everett, until the wedding," Lillian smiled, catching Logan's eye across the room. "Mrs. Reed suits me fine, doctor. It has from the start." The wedding took place the following Saturday. A perfect autumn day with golden light filtering through the turning leaves of the aspens in the Baker's extensive gardens. Logan, dressed in a new suit purchased by Edward Baker, despite his protests, waited beside a flower-covered arbor, his heart pounding with anticipation. When Lillian appeared on Edward's arm, Logan's breath caught in his throat. She wore a simple dress of ivory satin, her chestnut hair loose around her shoulders except for small braids woven with wildflowers. She looked radiant, her green eyes shining with happiness as they met his. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the local minister speaking of love's healing power and the courage it took to open one's heart after loss. Logan and Lillian had written their own vows, simple declarations of love and commitment that brought tears to the eyes of the small gathering of guests, mostly friends of the Bakers, but a few townsfolk who had come to know the couple during their stay. "I found you when you had no words," Logan said, his voice steady despite his emotion. "Now I promise to listen to all you have to say, to honor your thoughts and dreams, to walk beside you through whatever joys and sorrows life brings." "You sat with me in my silence," Lillian responded, her eyes never leaving his. "You asked for nothing but offered everything. I promise to be your partner in all things, to build a life of meaning and purpose with you, to love you completely until my last breath." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Logan kissed Lillian with all the love that had grown in his heart since that first night in Clearwater Creek, when a silent woman had whispered, "Thank you." The celebration afterward was joyful but modest, just as they had requested. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Edward Baker called for attention and presented them with their wedding gift, a deed to 160 acres of prime farmland in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, already registered in both their names, and a bank draft substantial enough to build a home and establish a working farm or ranch. "This is too much," Logan protested, overwhelmed by the baker's generosity. "It's not nearly enough," Edward replied, his initial suspicion of Logan long forgotten. "You saved Lillian's life, brought her back to herself. There's no adequate payment for that." That night, in the privacy of the guest suite that had been Lillian's sick room, husband and wife came together for the first time. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the bond that had formed so unexpectedly on the trail. No regrets. Logan asked afterward, holding Lillian close against his heart. "Not one," she assured him, pressing a kiss to his chest. "You. Only that I didn't find you sooner," he replied honestly. "Think of all the days we could have had together." "We have all our days ahead of us," Lillian reminded him. "A lifetime to build something beautiful." They left Timberline a week later, traveling by stagecoach rather than horseback, with Thunder and a new mare for Lillian trailing behind. The journey to Oregon was long but uneventful, made comfortable by the baker's generosity and sweetened by the newlyweds' love for each other. The Willamette Valley welcomed them with fertile soil and abundant natural beauty. The land Edward had purchased for them was everything they could have hoped for: gently rolling hills, a clear stream, forests for timber, and meadows for grazing. They built their home that first year, a solid log cabin at first, with plans to expand as their family grew. Logan proved as adept at farming as he had been at cattle driving, his strong hands turning earth and raising barns with equal skill. Lillian established a garden that yielded abundantly, and started a small business selling preserves and baked goods to the growing community around them. In the spring of their second year in Oregon, Lillian gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, for the wild roses that had been blooming when Logan first sat beside a silent woman and waited patiently for her to heal. 2 years later, a son joined their family, James Logan Reid, named for the past they honored and the future they embraced. As their children grew, so did their farm and their love for each other. The nightmares that had once plagued them both Logan's wore memories. Lillian's grief faded gradually, replaced by the vivid reality of their shared life. Sometimes, visitors to their prosperous farm were told the story of how they met of a woman who hadn't spoken in days, and a cowboy who sat beside her until she said, "Thank you." It became a family legend, a tale of hope and healing that they passed down to their children and grandchildren. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Logan surprised Lillian with a special gift, a new edition of Tennyson's poems, bound in fine leather, with a pressed yellow primrose marking the poem he had read to her that night in the trapper's cabin. "You remember," Lillian said, touching the dried flower gently. "I remember everything," Logan replied, taking her hand. "Every moment since you first spoke to me." Lillian smiled, the years having only enhanced her beauty in Logan's eyes. "Who would have thought that? Thank you would be the beginning of such a journey?" "I think I knew even then," Logan admitted. "Something in your voice called to something in my soul, as if we were two halves of a whole finding each other at last." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in colors no artist could capture, Logan and Lillian Reid sat together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the evidence of their loved children's laughter, fields of grain, orchards heavy with fruit. From silence and solitude, they had crafted a symphony of shared life, a testament to the healing power of patience, kindness, and love. And sometimes, in the quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Lillian would rest her head on Logan's shoulder and whisper those two words that had changed everything: "Thank you," to which Logan would always reply, "No, my love, thank you."